Welcome to Word of Hope, Ovarian Cancer Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Word and Libby's Hope. For more links and information on this episode, visit wordofhopepodcast.com.
Welcome to the Word of Hope Ovarian Cancer Podcast, Episode 3, co-hosted by Paul Cacciatore of Libby's Hope and myself, Nate Manahan of Women's Oncology Research and Dialogue, also known as Word. If you're just subscribing to us, we'll hope you'll take the chance to look back at some of the back episodes, but we're going through a series of 10 topics of ovarian cancer from 2010. And today we'll be looking at 3 important topics, including NKTR-102, as well as several topics that talk about standard of care for ovarian cancer. Paul, let's jump right into NKTR-102.
Okay. In 2010, there were preliminary results given at ASCO in June of last summer for a stage 2 study, the first stage of that study. It was a phase 2 study. They designed it in 2 stages based on dosage, and they tested it in platinum-resistant ovarian cancer patients. Again, some of the most difficult to treat. NKTR-102 is a novel form of a drug called irinotecan. It's kind of a tongue twister, but it's mainly used for colon cancer. And to date, it's been mainly used by the Japanese in the ovarian cancer area for ovarian clear cell cancer, a very, very difficult to treat subtype of epithelial ovarian cancer. And what they did is I guess you could say that this is almost it's what's known as a pegylated form. The idea is that the drug is encapsulated in a novel formula. And what you get from that is the drug stays in your system longer than it would just with the kind of the straight formulation of the drug. And hopefully you get, in essence, more bang for the buck. You get more cancer killing ability with less toxicity.
Paul, as you stated, this study really discusses a very difficult segment of ovarian cancer patients. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
To give you an idea how difficult it is to treat this class of patients, when you look at the characteristics of the patients, it really shows those signs. 68% of the patients recurred within 3 months, which makes them very, very resistant, almost refractory in their treatment. 58% of the patients had 2 or more prior lines of treatment, and I think the median in the statistics was 3. So these are heavily pre-treated patients. Again, very difficult to treat. And then what they found out in this was that the median progression-free survival was 18 weeks for these patients, which is actually pretty good. And then what they did is they compared that 18 weeks to how long their progression-free survival was on their prior platinum drug, and it was 4 weeks. So as you can see, that's a pretty big increase of progression-free survival compared to literally using each patient and comparing it to their own situation on the prior drug they had been using. So that's a very nice increase. When you look at response rates for this, it was about 22% in the 14-day cycle, which is just more of a dosing convention, and 35% in the 21-day cycle, which is kind of interesting. It's a much better, obviously, response rate. But you would think that in the 14-day cycle, which really creates kind of a dose-dense treatment, meaning there's the same amount of drug but in a closer period of time, you would just think as a layperson that you would have more anti-cancer activity, but that isn't the case.
That is surprising. Now, as we move forward, what do you think the takeaway message of this study is?
I think the takeaway message on this NKTR-102 is it has a notably higher response in heavily pretreated both platinum-resistant and platinum-refractory ovarian cancer patients. Very difficult group to treat, and I think a very, very good result. This phase 2 trial is ongoing, and the company, Nectar Therapeutics, has already announced that they're in planning now for a phase 3 trial, which is very good because that indicates that they're seeing good results with the drug, and they want to increase the amount of women that would be in the trial to see what the effects are going to be.
Great, Paul. That is great information, and hopefully a lot will come of this as they go into phase 3 trials. Now let's move on to the next study we wanted to look at today.
The fourth drug, the next one we're going to move on to is AMG 386. And there was reporting last year on this drug in a phase 2 recurrent ovarian cancer trial. AMG 386, to kind of put aside all the complicated science, it's an anti-angiogenesis drug. It's a drug that in theory takes away a tumor's ability to form new blood vessels. And we know that Judah Folkman, in his career, monumental scientist of iconic stature, basically proved that in order for cancer to progress, it needs added blood flow to grow and to metastasize. And so this is that class of drugs that try to cut that off from the cancer. It has an interesting name. It's called a peptibody. I bet you haven't heard that one before. It's a combination peptide and antibody. So they come up with the name peptibody. And what it does is it blocks two important proteins, angiopoietin 1 and 2. And again, those are important proteins to the formation of blood vessels that a tumor needs. As it grows, it needs an enhanced blood supply. And these drugs are designed to cut off that blood supply by denying that new blood vessel growth. It was a 3-arm trial, and what's interesting is they combined this AMG 386 with weekly paclitaxel, which, as we also know, in end of 2009, beginning of 2010, when you use weekly paclitaxel, or what's known as the dose-dense regime for paclitaxel versus just the ordinary dosage for paclitaxel, it actually increases survival. A Japanese study found that out. And so what they did is they combined it with AMG 386. And what they found out was in the two different dosing arms, I think in the control arm, the progression-free survival was about 4.6 months. In the highest dosage arm, the increase was up to 7.2 months, which is, again, a nice increase. The median dose arm was 5.7 months, but again, still an increase, a lower dose, but still an increase over the control. The response rates, just so you have those, in the higher dose was 37%. In the 3 milligram arm, the lower dose was 19%. And then in the control arm, 27%, which creates a bit of an anomaly because you would have thought that first dosing arm would have been a little higher.
Paul, that is sort of odd. Do you think that is right, or is it more of an aberration?
I think that's a little bit more of an aberration because when you look at another form of criteria, the gynecologic cancer intergroup, what they do is, unlike a lot of the U.S. studies, they don't look at just radiological scans to determine, tumor growth or shrinkage or progress. What they do is they use those scans as well as CA-125, again, the blood marker in the blood, to indicate a benefit. And in that, they found out the high dose was 71% objective response rate, 58% for the lower dose, only 28% in the control arm. So again, I think we have another good drug, that I think actually represents has a good future, I think, in treating difficult to treat women. It was paired up with this weekly paclitaxel, which is a bit of a more toxic regime. And the patients fared pretty well in it. There were adverse events in it. The good news was, and interestingly, there was no bowel perforations. Bowel perforation is a big side effect of Avastin that we've seen in the past. And in this case, there was no bowel perforations. But I should note, again, I went and checked the clinical trials just as we did with the other drugs that we covered. And for clinical trials with respect to AMG 386, there were 4. When I checked, there were 4 open ovarian cancer clinical trials that were using the drug, and they're using that drug in those 4 open trials. The combinations of other drugs that they're using include paclitaxel, carboplatin, Doxil, and topotecan. So there's at least a variety of drugs that are there being used too.
Paul, this is great information, and I hope a lot of women, if you have more questions about this, please use our comments on our blog. We would love to be able to interact with you more on this. Paul, as we end today in this episode, let's look at our last topic from the day.
For our last topic, which is really more of kind of a heads up rather than per se a drug, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, which is a nonprofit alliance of 21 of the major U.S. cancer centers, has a whole series of guidelines on all different forms of cancer, practice guidelines. And they recently added 2 new combinations to the ovarian cancer guidelines. The first one is the combination of carboplatin and weekly paclitaxel, which is the one we kind of just talked about in combination with AMG 386. And they added that for first-line treatment. And then they added carboplatin and Doxil. Doxil's name is pegylated liposomal doxorubicin. Most of us know it by the trade name Doxil, for patients with platinum-sensitive ovarian cancer. And they've added that as well because that, in the Calypso trial in 2009, was found to produce a better result in platinum-sensitive patients than the standard of care of just carboplatin and paclitaxel. And so those are good results. The first edition, that Japanese study from 2009, the median progression-free survival, I think weekly paclitaxel was 28 months compared to 17 for the standard of care. And the survival at the 3-year point was 72%, and the standard of care was 65%. So again, a nice little edge. The Calypso trial, there was about a 27% reduction in risk for the recurrence of the cancer, and actually proved superior to the standard of care. And the interesting tidbit about the Calypso trial, to my knowledge, I think it's the largest recurrent ovarian cancer trial ever done. I believe that's the case. 976 patients, which is a large phase 3 randomized trial of ovarian cancer patients. And that's about it. So we just wanted to give everybody a heads up on those two combination changes because they're beneficial for first-line treatment and also for recurrent ovarian cancer.
That's awesome, Paul. I think what this gives is a lot of women will have a lot of opportunities to learn about the different drugs that are treating the different types of ovarian cancers that they're having, and it will hopefully, especially, we talked about it earlier that Avastin was something that a patient today could go and talk to their doctor about that may be outside of clinical trial. Are any of the other drugs available outside of clinical trial to your knowledge, or are they all strictly in a clinical trial?
No, what we've done, these drugs, everything that I've gone through so far have been clinical trial drugs, Nate. Yeah. And again, that's why at the end of each drug, I just try to give some semblance as of you and I talking today, how many trials were open. For those drugs. But I think, for the women with inherited ovarian cancer, I think the PARP class of drugs is really promising because it's always easier, I think, to find a specific attribute of cancer and design a drug to attack it, to take advantage of it because it's a weakness in the cancer. And that's exactly what they did with that class of drugs. So, and then I think AMG, kind of another anti-angiogenesis drug. The interesting thing about the Nectar drug, the NKTR-102, is that is a very difficult group of women to treat. And I think when you make some inroads on that, I think you have to consider that news positive. But again, I think, a lot of the drugs that can be beneficial today are available through clinical trials. And as we know from the stats, I think a recent poll I had seen said about 50% of patients show interest in clinical trials, but only 10% take advantage of them. So I think this is an issue. What we're doing, what you're doing, is making this stuff known for patients so they can bring that information to their doctor. And then hopefully their doctor is open to that conversation. And then hopefully also there's clinical trial locations that are convenient for the patient that they can get to and be able to get that treatment.
Paul, great information. We are so glad that you're with us and walking us through all these studies and helping us understand what is happening in ovarian cancer research and education. As we go through these 10 topics and go beyond in Word of Hope podcast, if you are a caregiver or an ovarian cancer patient and survivor, we would love to hear your comments and questions. And we want to help you be empowered in your conversations with your physicians and with your surgeons. So please join us at wordofhopepodcast.com. And you can make comments there. You can follow the links to all the resources and the references that Paul has talked about. You can find links to Paul's website as well as to our website at Word. And we would love it if you would join us there, making comments in the comments section, or you can find the contact us and you can contact us directly through email. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We hope that you'll join us next time as we look at ARID1A gene mutation and how that affects ovarian cancer.
You've been listening to Word of Hope, Ovarian Cancer Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Word and Libby's Hope. For more information on this episode and how to subscribe, visit wordofhopepodcast.com.